involved with the movie. It came from a manager, Ian Grant, who basically told us that the Oxford Film Company were wanting Big Country to do the soundtrack for this new movie they were doing. So memories a bit sketchy as to how it came about. But I think it was in '84, we just finished recording our second album, Steeltown, out in Stockholm, out in Sweden, at ABBA's Polar Studio, and we came back and we'd done all the touring and all the recording that went along with that. And so when we got asked to do the soundtrack, we kind of jumped at it because we hadn't got around to writing our next album.
Big Country we loved Big Country. They were such a great band at the time, and shooting a Scottish film, it just seemed obvious that we should try. And EMI were making the movie, they're a record company. It wasn't difficult to get connections to ask the question, and they were just instantly dead excited about it, which all seemed great. A little bit harder later, when we got into post-production. Big Country were touring in Germany, and we were getting to the point where we really needed to start working on the score, and we really just could not get their attention.
I mean, that music, we put that Big Country music on in the edit, so I was always hearing that, but we had no idea whether we were really going to be able to pull that off. And I remember that was a pretty stressful. We just couldn't get them to watch the movie. So they were very big at the time, and they were touring all the time, and they'd said, oh, this sounds, you get this sort of thing. It's like Big Country, yeah, they're interested in having a conversation. When,
And we really needed them to sit down and watch it, and it just wasn't happening. So in the end, Mike and I thought, okay, we're just going to have to go to Germany. So we went and literally joined the tour.
Andy and I flew to Munich and met them. They'd done a gig in at this big circus space in Munich, or a space that was shared with the circus, because when we went out, what I remember is Stuart, Bruce, Mark and Tony, and like 60 elephants. We were in this massive hangar with all these elephants and these four guys, trying to talk them into watching the movie.
But we literally got on their bus with a 3/4-inch machine and a monitor and showed them the rough cut of the film on the tour bus as we drove around Germany. I mean, it was so Spinal Tap, it was ridiculous.
They had edited their movie to songs from our first album, The Crossing, and from our second album, Steeltown, and they sent us a rough edit, the time code on it. And apart from the fact that it was incredibly funny, the music fitted.
Then it was a matter of, going to Dunfermline, sitting down with Stuart, God bless him, and starting a conversation. He had incredibly high, he'd been listening to soundtrack after soundtrack after soundtrack. And I remember it's like, the only soundtrack I like is Merry Christmas, Mr. Lawrence. I remember him saying that. And he was just really committed to finding a poetic and apt sound to express the dreams of these kids. So you have this, and the spirit of the landscape. And so what you have are these kind of hapless guys, but living in the world with this really anthemic, big music that's sort of talking about something, a kind of emotional capability that they have no idea they could ever touch. And I think that contrast really makes you love them more.
It was kind of strange because, like I said earlier, they had actually edited the movie, which was, I would say, about 85% complete. So a lot of the scenes were edited to the music that we had originally recorded. The only thing that I wasn't keen on doing two sound-alike tracks. It was just a bit like, we want to move on from that. And also Stuart had he'd composed some instrumental stuff, and we wanted to do more of that, and I got involved in writing a few incidental pieces as well. And Mark did some great sort of atmospheric drum things, and we just didn't want to go back the way and repeat ourselves. But we couldn't do that because, like I said, it was written in stone, the tempo, just only two of the songs. And we must have saw that movie, I reckon, about 500 times. maybe even more, just going over it every day, 12 hours a day for a month or whatever. But just the way the movie's layered, you always picked up, there's always new things, and it's a genuinely funny movie,
And I love what they did, It's a difficult skill to start. It's one thing to write a song, it's a very different thing to start writing score to picture. And they got into that really fast, and I think what they did is amazing.
I got a phone call from one of the girls in the office, who I think was maybe a temp, and she said, listen, we booked you into the studio in Glasgow called Park Lane Studios, and the engineer's coming up. He's coming up tomorrow. His name's Jeff. I've given him your address, so he'll be here at midday or whatever, for flying up. So anyway, my doorbell goes and it pushes the intercom. Oh, it's Jeff here. Oh, hi Jeff. I've been expecting you to come in. So this guy Jeff comes in, and we're just chatting away, and first time he's met me, first time I've met him, and making him a coffee and whatnot. And he was asking what the band had been doing. I said, we've been, out in Sweden doing the second album. And, it's small talk. And I'm saying, well, what have you been doing? Have you been working with? He goes, I just did an album with Elvis Costello a while ago. Anything else? He went, yeah, I did some stuff with a band called Badfinger and also a band called The Beatles. And I went, you're Jeff Emmerich, aren't you? And it was like, oh no. So I ran through to my wife, who was getting dressed in the bedroom. I said, go and nip over to Finefair and get some decent coffee, because I can't give him this own brand yellow label stuff. It's Jeff Emmerich, it's the Beatles engineer. So anyway, Jeff and I went round to see Stuart Adamson, and then we all travelled through to Park Lane Studios in Glasgow, and they were set up to take the movie as well as the sound. Also another engineer called Matt Butler, he was a great guy. And I think the reason Jeff was involved was because he'd maybe done soundtrack stuff with Paul McCartney in the past, and obviously knew what he was doing. It wasn't just a job for a normal engineer producer. And working with Jeff Emmerich was just, apart from the fact he was a Beatles engineer, I learned so much from him, and you've got to watch this big, well, it was a big television screen at the time with the time code. It wasn't a big widescreen back then, but you're working to something that's there, the movie. And he was fantastic, he was brilliant.
When Big Country were recording the soundtrack for the film, they were in a studio on the south side of Glasgow, and I was living in the west end of Glasgow, and Mike Huffman phoned me and said, I'm going down to the studio today, do you want to come down with me to meet the band? And I was like, yes, I'll be there. And it was a funny little studio. It was near Queen's Park, and it was down a little lane. And so I went in, but they were obviously in a kind of sound booth bit, and I was standing with Mike in this thing. So I had to wait till they finished and all that. And then they all come out and they're all like, oh wow, man, oh look at this Will and things and the thing. Then we all went for a pint to the nearest pub, which was like minutes away from it. And we had a great chat about, they were asking about the filming, acting, character, and I was asking them about music, touring, how you write for a film. They were just totally, as you would expect, totally accessible, down to earth, normal guys, just like me, they were just like chatting, but good humoured. Yeah, I did, I liked them a lot.
I always remember after we mixed it up at Park Lane, up at Rab Andrews' studio, Park Lane in Glasgow, we went down to Air Studios in London, which is owned by George Martin, and again working with Jeff, and just watching how he put the whole thing together, because we had all the pieces of music were like, a minute and a half long, 2 minutes long, 30 seconds long, just to fit in all these scenes. And I always remember watching him edit, and he had the 2-inch master tape, and he was like, I'm going, what are you doing? And he's pulling all this tape out, and he's got a razor blade, and he's doing these big cuts, like crossfades. You could do it on a computer nowadays, crossfade, it doesn't work, undo. And he's got this razor blade, and he's slashing it at this, big long sort of angle. He's going for ages. I'm going, that's your music. Don't worry, lads. And then he tapes it up, and all these amazing crossfades, and taking all these individual pieces of music to make one long, I think it was maybe 24 minutes or something, and doing that manually they had a computer. And then George Martin came in, he was saying hello to Jeff, and then next minute Paul McCartney comes in to say hello to Jeff, and he was doing the frog chorus at the time. And it was just all these, you know, people associated with the Beatles are coming in to see Jeff, and we're like going, this is nuts. So again, another fond memory, you know. Just to me, Jeff Emmerich was one of the most musical geniuses. I think he could have got a lot more credit. He probably did, but you know, brilliant, Jeff. Thank you very much. You did. That was fantastic.
I thought the soundtrack of the film was, it was so kind of stirring and rousing. It fitted in so well, and it also had that element of kind of myth and romance that they kind of, you know, of them being kind of like almost like highwaymen or something, and the whole stuff about you know, Rob Roy, and I think all that fitted in beautifully, particularly in the scene. And I wasn't even in it. I only saw this when I went to the cinema to see the film. And in the mound, when everybody's running and the police are chasing, they're chasing the bikes, and that just the whole of that. I remember having that sort of like a wee kind of knot in my stomach and going, wow. It just, to me, that looked, it fitted in just so perfectly. That rousing thing, and these characters being chased and going out and leaving Edinburgh to get in. The funny thing was, it was almost like the Highlands was just next door to Edinburgh. They left Edinburgh and then they were in the Highlands. But of course, that's film. You can forgive that. But yeah, the music was fantastic. It was a perfect fit.
It definitely fitted in musically. What we were doing at the time, it was a good progression to the way we were going. In between doing the soundtrack, the next year we went on to do an album called The Seer, and there's kind of elements of Restless Natives in The Seer as well, you know. So, and we, even to this day, we still play Restless Natives in our set. We kind of do it as an encore.
It was so funny because when I was walking down the street, I just live, you know, off Upper Street in Islington, and I walked by Islington Town Hall and I glanced over and there's a poster, Tonight, Big Country. So you know, I bought a ticket online, you know, and I went to, and it was unbelievable. This place was rocking, and it was all these kids my age, as it were, you know, all these people who had loved Big Country in the 80s and still loved them, and it was packed, and you could hear this, again, this big anthemic sound. It was so energizing. And then the extraordinary thing was, I go through the set, and they go off, and I'm like, I'm gonna somehow get past the guards and tell them that I know them and see if I can't see the band. And they came back on and they played Restless Natives as the encore. And I was just like, are you kidding me? That this still lives for them in some special place. And it did for the audience, and the audience went ape.
We always play Restless Natives. If we're going to do it in the set, we like to leave it to the very end, so we get an encore, you know. We'll do Fields of Fire last, and then I think a lot of our audience know that, you know, they all shout for it and stuff like that. And we'll come back on, and we've even the original lineup of Big Country, we kind of rearranged it live differently from the way we recorded it, and we extended the intro, and so it's quite atmospheric, and it's quite a big build-up, and then it kicks in, and it's, you know, it's like all that kind of stuff. So we stopped doing it for a few years because obviously you've got to put other songs into the set, but up until recently we brought it back in. And a lot of the guys that come to the gigs, they just love it, you know. So I think we'll continue to have it in for the foreseeable future.